Today we're going to talk about color mixing. First, we'll start with the primary colors. You can think of these as your number 1. Primary colors can't be made by any other color mixed together. These ones are kind of our pure 3 colors. They come straight from nature. Nothing can create those colors. So we've got red and yellow and blue. Our secondary colors are going to be our number 2. Second, for being second, is like number 2. The reason why they are considered our number 2 color is because if you add a primary plus a primary, so that'd be our 1 plus 1 would equal our 2. So a secondary is made when 2 primaries are mixed together. So for example, down here we've got red mixed with yellow, and that creates our orange. We've got yellow mixed with blue, and that makes our green. And then we've got blue mixed with red to make our violet. So our 3 secondary colors are orange, green, and violet. Tertiary colors are like 3. Tertiary is a fancy weird word for 3 or third. So you get this by adding a primary color to its closest or adjacent secondary color. So when I pull up a color or a picture of the color wheel, I'll show you how you want to use the adjacent or next to secondary color and mix that into the primary. You don't want to just add any secondary color to the primary. I'll explain why in a moment. So here are your 6 tertiary colors. You've got red, a primary color, plus orange, your secondary color, and you've got red-orange. And to name these, you just call them red-orange. So you always want to name the primary name first. So red is our primary color and orange is our secondary color. So it's called red-orange, not orange-red. So we've got red-orange, yellow-orange, yellow-green, blue-green, blue-violet, and red-violet. These ones are slightly more confusing than our basic primary and secondary colors, so you can pause this video, take some notes on these. Remember, the way you label them or write down the name is red-orange, and you always want to name the primary name first. So for example, this would not be violet-blue, it would be blue-violet. Now when I was explaining when you want to add a primary color to its closest secondary color, here's what I mean. When you lay all those colors out on a color wheel, you've got one circle of color. Now, if I want to make this tertiary color of yellow-orange, I'm going to mix this primary color, yellow, with orange. And these ones are pretty much the closest you can get with primary and secondary. You can also go the other direction. You can mix yellow with its closest secondary on its left, which would be green. So you'd come up with yellow-green. What you don't want to do is mix a primary color with its opposite secondary color. See how these ones are straight across from each other? You don't want to mix these two. You're actually going to end up with what's called a neutral color. These ones are kind of like a brownish gray, like a naturey kind of color. So that's why you don't want to combine the colors that are across from each other. You want to only combine the primary with the secondary that's closest to it. So that would be orange with the yellow or green with the yellow. That's going to make your tertiary of yellow-orange or yellow-green. And then we've got this area over here where we've separated out our primary colors, our secondary colors, and our tertiary colors. So you can kind of see what the spacing looks like. Next, we'll talk about tints, shades, and tones. For our creative color wheel project, we are only going to be focusing on tints and shades. A tint is when you add white to a color, a shade is when you add black to a color, and a tone is when you add gray to a color. And remember, gray is just a mixture of black and white. For our project, since we're going to be doing this with watercolors, the only difference is that our tint, instead of adding white to our watercolor, we're going to add more water. And that, in watercolor, is going to make our color lighter. So here's an example with the color red. You can make a tint lighter, so you can have several different tints of a color. You won't only have just one tint. You could make tons of tints. So for example, here's our pure hue or our natural hue. We've added white, or in watercolor, we've added water. And then you could make it go even lighter by adding more white or more water. And here's our red version of a shade. So here's our pure hue of red. You add some black, and you get a darker shade of red. You add even more black, and you get an even darker shade of red. Now, the thing to think about with black is you don't want to add too much, because black's really strong and it'll quickly overtake your color. And the same thing goes for tone, although we won't go into a bunch of depth with that because we won't be using that for this project. But the more gray you add to it, the more dull your color becomes. Here's just an example of all of the natural hues of the color wheel, all of those hues mixed with white, all of these hues mixed with gray, and then all of the natural hues mixed with black. So again, adding white or water is going to make your tint, and then adding black is going to make your shade. And our normal color is what we'll call a hue. So these are some examples of what our project might look like. So you're going to make a creative color wheel. Instead of the basic color wheel where it's just those shapes all around in a circle, just sometimes they're circles, sometimes they're squares. Those are really basic. So what I want you guys to do is come up with some creative ways to draw out a color wheel. In the next slide, I'm going to describe how many spaces you'll need and how many tints and shades of each color you're going to make. Coming up with the ideas for your creative color wheel layout, you're going to need to remember to make 37 spaces total. Right here, I've kind of laid out every shade, tint, and normal hue that you're going to need. And I've sort of categorized into the primary colors. So we've got red, yellow, and blue. And then I also have the secondary colors, orange, green, and violet. And then over here on the right, this whole section is your tertiary. And right down here is your neutral. So your neutral you actually make by combining all three primary colors. So you mix together red, yellow, and blue, and you can get your neutral. Now notice I have 3 different values for every color. That's your tint, your normal hue, and your shade. You're going to have to do this with every color on here. So remember, since we're doing this in watercolor, you're going to add water to your color. Just use your regular color. Try to find a decent amount of water to paint ratio. And again, I'll show you how to do that in a different video. And then you're going to add a little bit of black to your color to make that shade. So total, you will need 37 spaces. Try to group together each of your colors so they're not all spread out, or each value of each color. So they're not just spread out. You want each of them to be grouped together so you can easily find your color and each tint, hue, and shade.